From as far back as I could remember, my sister, Lauren, was the golden child. It wasn't something I noticed outright in the beginning, not in the way an adult might see favoritism as clear as daylight. No, it was subtle at first. Little things. When we were kids, if Lauren scraped her knee, my mother would scoop her up, cooing over her, pressing gentle kisses onto her forehead, making a whole event out of finding the prettiest Band-Aid for her. If I fell, I got a quick, "You're fine," and a glance in my direction before she returned her attention to Lauren. I thought nothing of it then. Maybe I was just tougher and Lauren needed more care. At dinner, I would eat all my vegetables, clearing my plate like a good child should. Lauren, on the other hand, would wrinkle her nose at the greens, shaking her head, insisting she couldn't eat another bite. My mother would sigh, shaking her head, and then, without fail, she would let Lauren leave the table, untouched food and all. If I had tried that, I would have been met with a firm stare and a reminder that food wasn't to be wasted. But I was the eldest. I was expected to be more responsible. It was easy, as a child, to make excuses for my parents. To tell myself that maybe they saw something in Lauren that I just couldn't understand. Maybe she really did need more of their attention. I tried not to dwell on it. But as we grew older, it became harder to ignore. By middle school, I had learned that hard work was my only way forward. I poured myself into my studies, excelling in every subject. When report cards came home, I would clutch mine tightly, anticipation buzzing in my chest. Straight A's. Perfect scores. Surely this time, they would be proud. My mother would glance at the paper, nod once, and say, "That's good. Keep it up." My father, engrossed in the evening news, would give a distracted, "Nice job, kid," before returning to whatever debate played on the television. And yet, when Lauren brought home a B on a test she barely studied for, it was a big deal. My parents fawned over her, telling her how smart she was, how proud they were that she was trying so hard. They took her out for ice cream to celebrate. I stayed home, studying for my next exam, the taste of resentment thick in my throat. Still, I pushed forward. High school came, and with it, the pressure of college applications. I buried myself in books, in extra credit, in volunteer work, anything to pad my resume. Every night, I studied long past midnight, my eyes burning with exhaustion. I earned a full-ride scholarship, something most students only dreamed of. I still remember the moment I received the acceptance letter, my heart pounding as I opened it, reading the words over and over. Full tuition covered. Prestigious internship opportunities. A future that was mine for the taking. I showed my parents, hoping for something more this time. Some acknowledgement. Maybe even pride. My mother smiled, but it was the kind of smile you gave a neighbor when they told you about their new garden. Polite. Distant. "That's nice," she said, patting my shoulder before turning back to the dinner she was preparing. My father barely looked up. "Good job," he murmured, flipping the page of his newspaper. I swallowed my disappointment and told myself it didn't matter. I was doing this for myself, not for them. Meanwhile, Lauren got a summer job at Maple Cafe, a small, local coffee shop that was barely a step above minimum wage. The house erupted in celebration. Balloons. A cake with "Congratulations, Lauren," written in pink frosting. My parents beamed, bragging about how she was learning responsibility. That night, we had a family dinner in her honor. I sat there, pushing my food around my plate, wondering if they had ever thought to celebrate me. Even in college, the pattern remained. I balanced classes, internships, and part-time work, keeping my grades pristine while still managing to afford a life of independence. Lauren, meanwhile, floundered. She switched majors 3 times before finally settling on business, though from what I gathered, she barely scraped by in her courses. And yet, our parents still doted on her. If she struggled, they swooped in to help. When she needed money, they wired it to her without question. I, on the other hand, never asked for a dime. I knew better than to expect help. After graduation, I secured a job in my field almost immediately. My achievements stacked up, promotions, commendations, recognition from my peers. I was building something real, something lasting. But at family gatherings, the conversation always circled back to Lauren. "She's working so hard," my mother would say, smiling as if Lauren had moved mountains. "She's really proving herself," my father would add. And me? I was barely acknowledged. One Christmas, I arrived at the family home to find a mountain of presents under the tree, most of them labeled for Lauren. She opened box after box, clothes, jewelry, even an expensive tablet. I received a single gift. A scarf. No card, no note, just a hastily wrapped package handed to me as an afterthought. I thanked them anyway. I had learned long ago that my gratitude meant nothing. The realization settled deep in my bones. I would never be their Lauren. No matter how hard I worked, no matter what I achieved, I would always be the shadow in her light. And yet, despite everything, I still held on to a shred of hope. That one day, maybe, they would see me. Truly see me. That something would change. That hope, however, would eventually shatter. And when it did, there would be no going back. The phone call came late on a Tuesday evening. I had just settled onto my couch with a cup of tea, exhausted from another long day at work. My days were always packed: meetings, deadlines, projects that required every ounce of my attention. But it was worth it. I had built something for myself, a life that was mine alone, free from the weight of my family's expectations. Or at least, that was what I told myself. When my phone rang, I hesitated before answering. Seeing Mom displayed across the screen still sent a strange mix of emotions through me. A tightness in my chest. A whisper of longing for something I had never truly had. I took a breath and answered. "Hello?" "Hi, sweetheart." My mother's voice was smooth, almost too pleasant, as if she were carefully constructing her tone. "Your father and I were just talking, and we'd really love for you to come to a family gathering this weekend." I blinked, stunned by the unexpected invitation. A family gathering? Yes, at Rosewood Restaurant this Saturday evening. It's been so long since we've all been together. We want to celebrate as a family. There was something about the way she said it, something that felt too rehearsed, too deliberate. My parents had never been the type to extend an invitation without reason. I hesitated. "What's the occasion?" "Oh, just a little get-together," she said breezily, but the way she avoided my question made my stomach twist with unease. I knew better. I should have known better. And yet, deep down, a part of me still clung to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this time was different. Maybe this time, they would see me. Maybe this time, I wouldn't just be a background character in my own family. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. Saturday arrived faster than I expected, and as I pulled into the parking lot of Rosewood Restaurant, I tried to ignore the growing sense of apprehension curling in my chest. Rosewood was an upscale place, the kind of restaurant reserved for big occasions. White tablecloths, dim lighting, waiters in crisp uniforms. It wasn't the type of place my parents usually picked for casual gatherings. I stepped inside and was immediately met with the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and cheerful conversation. As my eyes adjusted to the warm lighting, I saw them, my family, gathered around a long, beautifully decorated table in the center of the room. Balloons floated above their heads, and a massive banner hung just above the table. My heart stopped. "Congratulations, Lauren." A slow, sinking realization settled in my gut. This wasn't just a family gathering. This wasn't about me at all. It was for her. Again. I scanned the table quickly, my pulse pounding in my ears. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all gathered, all laughing, all completely oblivious to the fact that I had just walked into something I never should have come to. And then I saw her, Lauren, sitting at the center of it all, basking in the attention like it was air she needed to breathe. Her long brown hair was curled to perfection, her makeup flawless, her smile bright. She thrived in moments like these. She turned her head, catching sight of me, and the smirk that curled on her lips made my blood run cold. "Oh," she said, her voice loud enough to draw attention. "I didn't know you were coming." I stood frozen, my mind trying to catch up with the sheer weight of humiliation settling over me. I turned my gaze toward my mother, hoping, praying that I had misunderstood. that this wasn't what it looked like. But when she met my eyes, there was nothing there. Just an awkward smile, a nervous shift of her shoulders. "We didn't know if you'd be free," she said quickly, as if that excuse would somehow make everything better. I glanced at the table. Every seat was taken. Plates of food were already being served. Conversations were already flowing. They hadn't saved me a seat. They hadn't even thought to consider that I might want to be included. A slow numbness spread through me, coating my skin like ice. Lauren, enjoying the moment, leaned back in her chair, tilting her head. "Or if you'd even bother to show up." Her voice was dripping with amusement, a dagger wrapped in silk. I inhaled sharply. The restaurant suddenly felt too small, the air too thick, the walls closing in around me. I had come here with hope, foolish, naive hope that maybe, for once, I would be seen. That I would matter. But I should have known better. I forced my expression into something neutral, something unreadable, even as I felt something deep inside me crack. I had a choice. I could stand there, let them see how much this hurt, let them watch as I tried to make sense of the betrayal sitting heavy in my chest. Or I could walk away. I chose the latter. I turned on my heel, ignoring the way my mother's voice called after me, ignoring the way my father barely even noticed, ignoring the way Lauren's laughter rang in my ears like a cruel melody. I stepped outside into the crisp night air, my hands trembling at my sides. The restaurant door shut behind me, muffling the sounds of their celebration. I pulled in a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. I had been a fool to believe things would ever change. They hadn't saved me a seat. They had invited me out of obligation, not out of love. And when I had left, when I had chosen myself for once, no one had stopped me. No one had cared. The cold realization settled deep in my bones. I had spent my whole life fighting for a place in a family that never truly wanted me. And maybe it was time to stop fighting. Maybe it was time to let them go. I drove home in silence, the city lights blurring through my windshield as I tried to process what had just happened. The restaurant, the banner, the way Lauren had smirked at me, as if she had been waiting for that moment, to remind me, yet again, of my place in this family. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. I had known. I should never have gone. And yet, I had still allowed that fragile, desperate hope to lead me straight into another humiliation. The realization burned. When I reached my apartment, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the dashboard, my hands still wrapped around the wheel as if letting go would make everything unravel. My heart pounded, a slow, dull ache against my ribs. No one had called me. Not when I left. Not afterward. No text, no message, no missed call. I was nothing but an afterthought to them. I forced myself out of the car, my movement stiff as I walked up the stairs to my apartment. The air inside was warm, the familiar scent of lavender lingering in the air from the candle I had left burning earlier. It was quiet, peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just walked away from. I sank onto the couch, running a hand down my face, my mind still replaying the night in vivid detail. Lauren's voice. That smirk. "Oh, I didn't know you were coming." Or if you'd even bother to show up. My stomach twisted, anger mixing with the dull ache of disappointment. Why had I expected anything different? For years, I had bent over backward to prove myself. To show them I was worthy of the same love, the same attention they so effortlessly gave Lauren. But it had never been enough. I had earned a full scholarship. I had built a career for myself without any of their help. I had done everything right. And yet, a summer job at a coffee shop had been worth more celebration than my years of effort. Tonight had been the breaking point. I wasn't going to let them do this to me again. I refused. I closed my eyes, breathing in deeply, trying to push past the heavy weight pressing against my chest. I needed to let it go. But then my phone buzzed. I hesitated before looking down, expecting a message from work or maybe a reminder about a bill. But it was a family group message. The words were sharp, searing through me like a blade. "What a beautiful night. So proud of our Lauren. Congratulations, sweetheart." Attached was a picture, Lauren at the center of the restaurant table, surrounded by family, her smile wide, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. My mother sat beside her, beaming with pride. My father, usually stoic, had a rare grin on his face. They looked happy. My absence didn't matter. It never had. I stared at the picture, my fingers tightening around the phone, my chest constricting with something raw and bitter. I closed out of the message, throwing my phone onto the couch beside me as I exhaled sharply, willing the emotions down. I wouldn't cry over them. Not anymore. I had barely slept when morning came, my mind restless, turning over every moment from the night before. I had no intention of reaching out to them. If they wanted to celebrate Lauren, fine. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, fine. I had finally decided to let them go. But then came the knock at my door. Sharp, loud, persistent. I frowned, pushing off the couch where I had spent the last few hours staring at the ceiling. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, my stomach twisted at the sight of them. My parents. My mother stood with her purse clutched tightly in her hands, her lips pressed together in a familiar, thin line. My father stood beside her, looking less tense, but just as unreadable. I didn't say anything at first. They hadn't come last night. They hadn't noticed when I left. And now, after everything, here they were. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Did you get the wrong apartment? My mother let out a sigh, tilting her head. Don't be like that. Like what? I asked, my voice even. She exchanged a glance with my father before stepping forward. Can we come in? I thought about saying no. I should have said no. But something in me needed to hear whatever excuse they had come up with. So I stepped aside, letting them into my apartment. They took a seat on my couch, my mother smoothing out her skirt as she exhaled dramatically. I sat across from them, waiting. They didn't apologize. They didn't even acknowledge what had happened the night before. Instead, my mother cleared her throat and said, "We need your help." I blinked. She continued, shifting slightly in her seat. The dinner last night was a bit more expensive than we anticipated. A cold dread slithered down my spine. We had to cover the bill, my father added. It came to about $1,200. I let out a short, humorless laugh. And what does that have to do with me? My mother smiled tightly. Well, since you didn't contribute in any other way, we figured you could at least help out financially. The words slammed into me, knocking the breath from my lungs. They hadn't invited me for me. They had invited me because they expected something from me. I had never been family to them. I had been an afterthought, a backup plan, a convenient solution. And now that they needed money, I was suddenly worth acknowledging. Rage bubbled beneath my skin, hot and relentless. You want me to help pay for a dinner that I wasn't even welcome at? My voice was eerily calm, despite the storm raging inside me. My mother waved a hand, as if brushing aside the details. It's just a small favor. We did pay for Lauren's college, after all. It's only fair if you help out just this once. And that was it. The moment where everything clicked. It had never been about love. It had never been about fairness. I had always been the backup plan. The one who didn't need anything, so they gave me nothing. I stood up, my pulse roaring in my ears. No. My mother's face twisted in irritation. Don't be dramatic. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling at my sides. I said no. Silence hung between us, thick and suffocating. My father let out a long sigh, rubbing a hand over his face. I don't see why you have to be difficult. I let out a bitter laugh. Difficult? You didn't even save me a seat. You invited me because you wanted my money, not because you wanted me there. That's not true, my mother said, her tone clipped. Yes, it is. I met her gaze, unflinching. For the first time in my life, I saw them clearly. And it was freeing. I walked to the door, holding it open. Get out. My mother's mouth fell open slightly. Excuse me? You heard me. My father hesitated, but when he saw the look on my face, he stood up. Come on, he muttered to my mother. She scoffed, shaking her head, but followed. I shut the door behind them without another word. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. I stood at the door long after they left, my fingers gripping the handle so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded, my breath shallow, but I refused to let myself break. They had come here, not to apologize, not to make things right, but to demand money. Money for a dinner I hadn't even been wanted at. I exhaled sharply, my chest tight with the sheer weight of realization. I had always known, deep down, that they didn't see me the way they saw Lauren. But now, it wasn't just a quiet suspicion lingering in the back of my mind. It was confirmed. Stated outright. I was their backup plan. The reliable one. The one who never asked for anything, so they never gave me anything. I pressed my palms against my temples, willing myself to stay calm, to push back the whirlwind of emotions clawing at my chest. Anger. Resentment. Disbelief. I should have expected this. And yet, somehow, it still hurt. I walked to the couch and sank onto it, rubbing my hands over my face. The apartment around me felt eerily silent, the ticking of the clock on the wall the only sound filling the space. They hadn't even pretended to care. They had shown up, asked for money, and when I refused, they called me dramatic. Dramatic. For not wanting to pay for a celebration that was never meant to include me. For refusing to be treated like an afterthought. For finally saying no. I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. Then, without thinking, I reached for my phone. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe some small, desperate hope that someone had reached out, that someone had realized how unfair this all was. But there was nothing. No missed calls. No messages. Nothing. I swallowed the lump in my throat and placed my phone back on the coffee table. I needed to move on. I needed to let them go. And yet, no matter how many times I told myself that, the ache in my chest didn't disappear. The next morning, I woke up feeling raw, as if my emotions had settled into my bones overnight. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. I went about my usual routine, making coffee, scrolling through the news, trying to act as if the previous night hadn't happened. But the moment my phone buzzed, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I reached for it cautiously, my fingers hovering over the screen before I tapped the notification. And then my breath caught. It was a Facebook post. From my mother. A long, emotional paragraph written in her usual dramatic fashion, accompanied by a picture of her and Lauren from last night's dinner. Family is everything. But sometimes, no matter how much you give, some people will still turn their backs on you. It's heartbreaking to be there for someone their entire life, only for them to refuse to be there for you in return. We raised both of our daughters with love, but sadly, not all children appreciate the sacrifices their parents make. Some forget where they came from. Some choose selfishness over family. And it hurts. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I stared at the screen, bile rising in my throat. Hundreds of comments flooded in beneath the post. Relatives, family, friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years, all jumping in to comfort her, to agree with her. You're such a good mother. Don't let one ungrateful child ruin that. Some kids just grow up selfish. You did your best. She'll regret it one day. You'll see. And then, the final blow. Lauren's comment, sitting smugly beneath all the sympathy. She's always been like this. It's just getting worse. I feel bad for Mom and Dad. I gritted my teeth, my fingers tightening around the phone. They were painting me as the villain. They were twisting everything, making it seem like I was the problem. I inhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay calm. They wanted me to lash out. They wanted me to call, to beg for an explanation, to give them the reaction they were looking for. I wasn't going to give them that. Instead, I set my phone down and walked to my desk, my mind already racing. If they wanted to lie, to twist the truth, then I would tell the real story. I wasn't going to argue with them in private, only for them to turn around and spin their own narrative in public. No, I was going to do this my way. I took my time writing the post. Every word had to be precise. Every sentence had to be clear. I didn't want to be emotional. I didn't want to rant. I wanted to lay out the facts. When I finished, I read over it twice, making sure it said exactly what I wanted it to say. Then I took a breath and hit post. The message appeared on my feed instantly, standing in stark contrast to my mother's vague, manipulative words. I wasn't going to say anything, but since my family has decided to publicly shame me, let me tell you the real story. I was invited to a family gathering under false pretenses. When I arrived, I found out it was actually a celebration for my sister, one that I wasn't even given a seat at. When I left, no one called to check on me. No one cared that I had walked out. The next morning, my parents came to my apartment. Not to apologize. Not to make things right. But to ask me to pay for the dinner. A dinner I wasn't included in. A dinner where I wasn't even wanted. When I refused, I was called dramatic. And now, they're trying to make it seem like I turned my back on them. No. I didn't turn my back on my family. My family turned their back on me a long time ago. And I am finally done pretending that it doesn't hurt. If you think that makes me selfish, so be it. But I will never apologize for choosing myself. I hit post. And then I sat back and watched. The response was immediate. People I hadn't spoken to in years started commenting. Some shared their own stories of favoritism, of parents who only cared when it benefited them. Others messaged me privately, telling me they had always suspected my parents treated me unfairly, but had never been sure. Even some of my relatives, ones I barely interacted with, sent quiet messages of support. Lauren tried to comment, tried to twist things again. But this time, people weren't blindly taking her side. For the first time, my voice was being heard. For the first time, I was telling my own story. And for the first time in my life, I realized something. I didn't need them. I never had. I had always been on my own. But now, I was okay with that. Now, I was free. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating violently against the nightstand. Groggy, I reached for it, squinting against the early morning light. The notifications were endless. Messages, missed calls, comment replies, an overwhelming flood of responses to the post I had made the night before. I hesitated before unlocking my phone. I had known my post would get attention, but I hadn't expected it to spread this fast. I scrolled through the comments first. Some were supportive, people who had read my words and understood, people who had lived through the same kind of favoritism, the same toxic family dynamics. You're so brave for speaking up. I went through the same thing, and I wish I had your strength. I've watched this happen in my own family too. Stay strong. You deserve better. Then there were the ones defending my parents. You only have one family. You'll regret cutting them off one day. This is disrespectful. Your parents gave you everything, and you throw it back in their faces. And of course, there were comments from relatives. My Aunt Carol had chimed in, clearly furious. This is disgusting. Airing private family matters on the internet? Shame on you. I rolled my eyes. The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother had been the one to post about me first. But somehow, I was the one at fault. Then I saw Lauren's comment. Wow. Just wow. I can't believe you would twist things like this. We invited you because we wanted you there, but you chose to leave. And then you refused to help Mom and Dad when they needed you. Some sister you are. My fingers twitched. I could have responded. I wanted to respond. But I didn't. Instead, I did something better. I took a screenshot of her comment, along with my mother's original manipulative post, and added it to my story. No captions. No explanations. Just the proof. And then I put my phone on silent and walked away. I wasn't going to waste my energy arguing with people who had already made up their minds. A few hours later, I checked again. The screenshots had been shared dozens of times. People were talking. My inbox was full of messages, some from old classmates, some from distant relatives, some from complete strangers. And then I saw the one that made me pause. A message from my cousin Sarah. Sarah had always been on the outskirts of family drama, never picking sides, always staying neutral. But now, she had something to say. Sarah, hey, I just wanted to say I saw everything and honestly, I'm not surprised. I always felt like your parents treated you differently. I remember how they used to make such a big deal out of Lauren's smallest accomplishments, while yours were barely acknowledged. It wasn't fair, and I'm sorry you had to go through that alone. I stared at the message, my throat tightening. Sarah and I had never been particularly close, But knowing that someone had noticed, that someone had seen what I had spent years enduring, it made my chest ache. I typed out a quick response. Me, thank you. That means more than you know. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. By evening, the fallout had reached full force. My mother had deleted her original post, but it was too late. The damage was done. Relatives were calling each other, choosing sides, trying to figure out how to fix the mess. My phone rang 3 times in a row, first from my mother, then from my father, and finally from Lauren. I didn't answer. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into silence. Instead, I sent a single text in the family group chat. Me, I said what I said. You don't get to rewrite the truth just because it makes you uncomfortable. I'm done being the one who stays quiet. Then I left the group chat. It felt like cutting a rope that had been strangling me for years. I expected to feel sadness, regret, doubt, but all I felt was relief. That night, I sat on my couch with a glass of wine, scrolling through the messages one last time before putting my phone away for good. And then, as if on cue, a knock sounded at my door. I stiffened. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a brief, fleeting moment, I considered ignoring it. But something in me needed to face this. I stood, walked to the door, and opened it. Lauren stood on the other side, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I raised an eyebrow. What do you want? She let out a sharp breath, shifting her weight. We need to talk. I leaned against the door frame. There's nothing left to say. Her jaw tightened. Look, I get that you're mad. I laughed, shaking my head. No, you don't get it. You never did. She scowled. This isn't just about you. You humiliated Mom and Dad. They humiliated me, I shot back. For years. And I let it slide. I let it go. But I'm done pretending it doesn't matter. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she looked unsure. I crossed my arms. You got everything, Lauren. Everything. And you still act like you're the victim. She exhaled sharply. I didn't ask for that. No, I said, voice steady. But you enjoyed it. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she sighed. So that's it? You're cutting us all off. I studied her for a long moment. No, I said slowly. I'm cutting off the people who don't respect me. If that includes you, then that's on you. Her lips pressed together. And then, just like that, she turned and walked away. I watched her go, feeling lighter. Because for the first time in my life, I had set the boundary. And I wasn't going back. After Lauren left, I stood at the door for a long moment, my fingers still gripping the edge of the handle. A part of me expected her to turn back, to say something else, some final insult, some manipulative plea, anything to regain control of the situation. But she didn't. She just walked away, disappearing down the hallway like a shadow finally retreating from the light. I shut the door and locked it, pressing my forehead against the cool wood as I exhaled. It should have felt like a victory. And in a way, it was. But the reality of it settled in my chest like a heavy stone. I had truly done it. I had drawn the line in the sand, and now there was no erasing it. There was no going back. I was free. And yet, as I sat back down on my couch, silence stretching around me, I realized something I hadn't fully prepared for. Freedom was lonely. I had spent my entire life wrapped in the dysfunction of my family, constantly trying to prove myself, constantly trying to carve out a place where I belonged. Now that I had finally let go, there was a strange emptiness in its place. I had always been alone. But this was different. This was a choice. And that made it both liberating and terrifying. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating on my nightstand. I groaned, rubbing the sleep from my eyes as I reached for it, half expecting more messages from relatives, more fallout from my post. But when I looked at the screen, my stomach twisted. It was my mother. For a moment, I debated letting it go to voicemail. But something in me, the same stubborn curiosity that had brought me to that disastrous dinner in the first place, made me answer. I hesitated before speaking. Hello? There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then, a sharp exhale. So this is what it's come to? I pressed my fingers to my temple, already exhausted. What do you want, Mom? You embarrassed us, she hissed, her voice clipped, controlled, but underneath it, I could hear the cracks. You humiliated your family. I laughed dryly. I told the truth. The truth, she scoffed. Do you have any idea what you've done? People are talking, calling, and asking questions. Do you have any idea how that makes us look? I clenched my jaw. If you're more worried about appearances than how you treated me, then I don't know what to tell you. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped. We loved you. We did everything for you. My fingers tightened around the phone. Name one time. What? I inhaled sharply. Name one time you made me feel like I mattered. One time you celebrated me. One time you made an effort to treat me like I was equal to Lauren. Silence. Just like I expected. Finally, my mother let out a bitter laugh. You always did love playing the victim. A slow, cold realization settled in my bones. She wasn't calling to fix things. She wasn't calling because she felt guilty. She was calling to control the narrative. To silence me. To make sure I fell back into my place, the quiet, obedient daughter who never caused problems. But I wasn't that girl anymore. And I never would be again. I exhaled, my grip on the phone loosening. You know what? You're right. She paused. What? I am the victim, I said, my voice steady. But not because I wanted to be. Because you made me one. Another long silence. Then, her voice sharpened. You think you're so much better than us, don't you? No, I said simply. I just finally know my worth. And with that, I ended the call. I sat there, staring at the screen as it went black. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. I tried to focus on work, on the routine I had built for myself. But the weight of everything still lingered, pressing at the edges of my mind. I had officially cut them off. Even though I had spent years preparing for it, imagining this exact moment, nothing could have prepared me for how real it felt. There was no more waiting for their approval. No more hoping that one day they would see me, love me the way they loved Lauren. That chapter was closed. And now, I had to figure out what came next. One evening, after a long day at work, I found myself sitting on my balcony, staring out at the city's skyline. The world was still moving. People were still living their lives, unaware of the storm I had just walked through. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the cool breeze brush against my skin. Then, my phone buzzed. For a split second, I thought it was another family member, another attempt to drag me back in. But when I looked at the screen, my chest tightened. It was Sarah. I hesitated before opening the message. Sarah, hey. Just wanted to check in. I know things are probably crazy right now, but I meant what I said before. You're not alone in this. I exhaled, something loosening in my chest. For so long, I had felt like I was. Like walking away from my family meant walking away from everything. But maybe it didn't have to be that way. I stared at the message for a moment before typing a response. Me, thank you. That means a lot. Maybe we can grab coffee sometime? Sarah, I'd like that. A small smile tugged at my lips. Maybe I had lost something. But maybe, just maybe, I was gaining something better. A life on my own terms. A future that wasn't weighed down by the past. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt hopeful. I spent the next few days bracing myself for more fallout. After my mother's call, I knew it was only a matter of time before someone else tried to drag me back in. Aunts, uncles, distant cousins, people who had barely acknowledged my existence before, suddenly had opinions on how I should handle my family matters. But the storm that I expected never quite came. Instead, there was silence. It was unsettling at first. I kept expecting another manipulative post, another attempt at emotional blackmail, another phone call filled with accusations and guilt trips. But none came. It was as if, after realizing they couldn't control me anymore, my parents had finally decided I wasn't worth the effort. And that, more than anything, confirmed what I had already known deep in my bones. They had never fought for me. Only against me. I focused on work, on rebuilding the pieces of my life that had been overshadowed by my family's constant manipulation. But some nights, when the world was quiet, doubt still crept in. Had I done the right thing? Had I gone too far? Was I really free, or just floating untethered, lost in the absence of what had once been my foundation? One evening, as I sat curled up on my couch, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, I saw the notification. Sarah had messaged me again. "Sarah, still up for that coffee? I know a great little place downtown." I hesitated for only a moment before responding. Yeah, I'd love that. For so long, I had believed that cutting off my family meant being alone. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe I had just been looking for connection in the wrong place. The cafe Sarah chose was warm and inviting, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, where conversations felt softer, more meaningful. I arrived a few minutes early, nervous in a way I hadn't expected. I hadn't seen Sarah in years, not really. Family gatherings were always filled with surface-level interactions, polite smiles, and obligatory small talk. But now, as I sat waiting for her, I realized I had never truly known her. A few minutes later, she walked in, scanning the cafe until her eyes landed on me. A small, tentative smile crossed her face, and suddenly, some of my nervousness melted away. She slid into the seat across from me, setting her bag down with a sigh. "I almost didn't come," she admitted, offering a sheepish grin. "I wasn't sure if you actually wanted to see me or if you just felt obligated." I raised an eyebrow. "You think I feel obligated? I'm the one who just walked away from our entire family." She let out a short laugh. "Yeah, well, family guilt runs deep." I nodded, wrapping my hands around my coffee cup. "It really does." For a moment, we sat in comfortable silence, the weight of unspoken things lingering between us. Then Sarah exhaled and leaned forward slightly. "Look, I know I never really said anything before, but I saw it. The way they treated you. The way they always put Lauren first." She shook her head. "It always pissed me off, but I didn't know what to do. And I guess I didn't want to get involved." I stared at her, my throat tightening. Hearing it from someone else, having someone acknowledge that I hadn't just imagined it, was both a relief and a sharp reminder of how long I had been gaslit into believing I was overreacting. "I get it," I said quietly. I didn't even want to believe it myself for a long time. She hesitated before speaking again. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Are you okay?" The question caught me off guard. Not what happened. Or why did you do it? Just, are you okay? I swallowed, considering my answer. "I don't know yet," I admitted. Some days, I feel like I've finally taken control of my life. Other days, I feel lost. Like I cut away this huge part of my past, and now I don't know what's left. Sarah nodded in understanding. "I get that. But for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing." I let out a slow breath. "Yeah, me too." And for the first time in a long time, I actually believed it. As the weeks passed, I slowly started rebuilding. Not in the way I had expected. There was no dramatic shift, no sudden moment where everything clicked into place. But little by little, I started filling the spaces my family had left behind with people who actually cared. Sarah and I became closer, meeting for coffee more often, talking about things beyond just family drama. I reconnected with old friends I had drifted from, people I had once been too busy trying to earn my parents' approval to truly appreciate. And most importantly, I started learning how to be happy on my own. There were still moments of doubt. Nights when I lay awake, wondering if I had burned too many bridges, if I would ever regret my decision. But then I would remember the years of neglect, the celebrations I had never been a part of, the way they had only reached out when they needed something from me. And I knew. I hadn't lost a family. I had lost people who never truly saw me as family to begin with. One evening, as I was leaving work, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, expecting a message from Sarah or one of my coworkers. But instead, it was a number I hadn't seen in a while. My father. I stared at it, my heartbeat steady. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't anxious. I was just done. I let the phone ring. I didn't answer. And when it finally stopped, I took a deep breath, exhaled, and walked away. Because for the first time in my life, I chose myself. And I wasn't going back. It had been a full month since I had last spoken to my parents. A month of silence. A month without manipulative messages. Without forced family gatherings. Without the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. And yet, I still felt them lingering in the back of my mind, like shadows stretching into my new life. I had thought that cutting them off would be like flipping a switch. One moment, they were there. The next, they were gone. But it wasn't that simple. Because walking away from them wasn't just about leaving behind the pain. It was about unlearning the part of me that had always craved their love, even when I knew I would never receive it. I was at work when I got the email. I almost ignored it. My inbox was always flooded with messages, clients, meetings, deadlines that never seemed to end. But then I saw the subject line. From Mom. Subject: let's talk. My stomach clenched, fingers hesitating over the mouse pad. I had blocked her number. I had left the family group chat. I had done everything to create distance. And yet, here she was, finding another way in. I took a slow breath, then clicked the email. The message was short. I know you're still upset, but enough is enough. You're making this bigger than it has to be. Family doesn't abandon each other over one misunderstanding. Call me. That was it. No acknowledgement of what had happened. No apology. Just a command. Call me. Like I was still that obedient little girl, waiting for her turn to be seen. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, my emotions a tangled mess of anger and exhaustion. She still didn't get it. She still thought this was about one incident. As if this wasn't the result of years of neglect. As if this wasn't about every birthday forgotten, every achievement ignored, every moment I had spent standing in Lauren's shadow. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For a brief second, I considered responding. Maybe if I explained it again, maybe if I spelled it out, she would finally understand. But then I remembered the last time we spoke. You always did love playing the victim. And I knew. She wasn't reaching out because she wanted to fix things. She was reaching out because she wanted control again. I closed the email. I didn't respond. And this time, I didn't feel guilty. A week passed. Then another. I didn't hear from her again. Not through email. Not through any other backdoor attempt at dragging me back in. And slowly, I started to breathe easier. I poured myself into work, into friendships, into building a life that was mine. Sarah and I became closer, our coffee meetups turning into long, easy conversations where we talked about everything and nothing. I started picking up new hobbies, things I had never given myself permission to enjoy before. I took a painting class, even though I was terrible at it. I started going to the gym, not because I had to, but because it felt good to take care of myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like me. Not the version of me my family had crafted. Not the second-place daughter, the overlooked sister, the afterthought. Just me. It wasn't until a few weeks later that the final piece of the past tried to claw its way back in. I was sitting on my balcony, enjoying the quiet hum of the city at night when my phone buzzed with a text. Not from my mother. Not from my father. From Lauren. I hesitated before opening it. I had ignored every attempt she had made to stir things up online. The comments, the jabs, the passive-aggressive digs disguised as concern. But this was different. Lauren, Mom and Dad are selling the house. Just thought you should know. I stared at the message, my chest tightening. For a long time, that house had been more than just a place. It had been a symbol of everything I had tried to belong to. Every holiday spent in its walls, every family dinner where I had been invisible, every moment where I had wished, just wished, that I was someone they could love the way they loved her. And now it was disappearing. I should have felt something. Loss, nostalgia, maybe even regret. But instead, all I felt was relief. I typed out a simple response. Me, okay. Nothing more. Because I didn't need to be a part of it. I didn't need closure from a house that had never truly been home. A few days later, as I was leaving work, I found myself walking past a bookstore. On impulse, I stepped inside. I wandered through the aisles, running my fingers over the spines of books, breathing in the scent of ink and paper. Then I saw it. A small, leather-bound journal. I picked it up, feeling the smoothness of the cover, the crispness of the pages. And without thinking, I bought it. That night, I sat down with the journal and a pen. I stared at the blank page, unsure where to start. And then, slowly, I wrote. Not about my family, not about the pain, not about the past, but about me. What I wanted. Who I was becoming. Page after page, I wrote. Until the past felt smaller. Until the future felt bigger. Until I realized that I wasn't just moving on. I was starting over. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone else to give me permission. I had already given it to myself.